So for my lack of a map, we are going to be jumping around a little bit in this chapter. We are going to be jumping from this branch, possibly to this branch, maybe down to this branch, and then all the way down here. Because I don't have a map of Elbath. And this is not wide enough to be fully Elbath, but you get the idea. It's a nice, pretty Idrisil-looking type tree. Gonna jump around a little bit in this chapter today. And we're gonna learn about some games. And I'm gonna make other references to various other pop culture shows, stories, whatever you want to go with. Okay, so chapter starts obviously with the Yamato cover page series, and this one Yamato has made his way into the Hakumai region, and while here they are apparently having a bit of a sumo tournament going on right now, and he just flipped Yokozuna Sukune, who is Irishima's big brother. So, for context here, Irishima is the sumo wrestler that we met way back at the beginning of Wano, when Luffy and Zoro and Otsuru had brought Tama to Otsuru's, little cafe tea house type thing. He was the guy who was flirting with Kiku while, when they first showed up. He's there trying to convince her to marry him. And Kiku has no interest in him. And she just, kind of politely sends him off, and then he ends up, eventually, him and Luffy end up having a sumo match against each other, and then that doesn't go well for him, and then Kiku cuts off his top knot because he's just being a jerk, and trying to, kind of force the marriage on her type of a thing. And she just slices off his top knot, which is just, one of the worst things you could do, for, dishonoring a guy in Wano. And we really haven't seen him since. We didn't see him throughout Onigashima or anything like that. I believe the last time we saw him was actually in this cover page series, way back when Yamato was first leaving the Flower Capital. I think we saw Urashima there. So now, having now arrived in the Hakumai region, Yamato has essentially just, drop-kicked big brother of said dude very easily in a sumo match. And we see Kawamatsu off to the side, happily watching this. Doesn't seem like anybody's been kidnapped here, so that's good. Or if anybody was kidnapped, they've now been returned. And it looks like they've possibly given Kawamatsu the new hat. We don't know yet. We do not see Ulti or Page 1 in this picture, but given the history that Ulti and Page 1 have with the citizens of Wano, they may have decided, we're gonna stand back and just kind of not interfere with anything unless something happens type of a thing. So we'll see how that goes. Into the chapter itself. So the chapter is chapter 1151, and it's called That's Enough, I've Got This, which could have several meanings given what happens in this chapter. So into the chapter, we cut back just right after what happened at the end of the last chapter with Dory and Bragi becoming demi-reversied and, demonized versions of themselves, gigantified demonized versions of themselves by Imu and Gunko's body, has done that, and now they're working their way across the island, and other giants have also been changed into these demi-reversied versions of themselves. We see Kashi here, and Kashi is trying to, of course, snap his captains out of this, trying to, make them remember. He's like, please snap out of it, captains. Elder Jarl is the world's oldest warrior. He's a living legend. And he's like, he's just trying to, reason with Dory and Bragi and the other giants that have been demi-reversied to try to get them to stop, to see reason, which is generally what happens in these types of situations. People are trying to, reason with whoever it is who has been essentially brainwashed and corrupted. Sometimes it works faster than other times. It depends on who was corrupted, who did the corrupting, and who is yelling at them to try to save their life, to try to stop them. It all depends on what's going on there. And so we see the panels or we see the next panel where the giant versions, the demon giants, are making their way closer to the other giants, and we see Kashi here and several other giants are all running. And they're like, we've always looked up to him. And it's just like, yeah, you said it, Kashi. So it's like the other giants are trying to help with reasoning with Dory and Bragi to get them to stop. And then we just get these, demonic close-ups of Dory and Bragi. And Bragi is like, but the elder we all idolized is just a broken old man now. That's why it's up to us to put him out to pasture. And after that, we cut over to Bragi, or over to Dory, and it's just like, we will reign as kings. Elbaf has no need for idols or gods. It is time to call forth a new era of war, an age ruled by the strong. It's like, okay, back up here, Dory and Bragi. I think you've lost yourselves a bit. Actually, they've lost themselves quite a bit in this regard. So we have, Dory and Bragi are here. They are trying to just make their way to Jarl. So there was something that kind of made me, that this kind of made me think of. Now we'll get to like all the game references in a moment, but this was something else that kind of made me think of something else that is like another interest that I have. So I love Doctor Who. I have a TARDIS back here. And in a couple of years ago, they had the 60th anniversary specials. And part of it was they ended up reuniting David Tennant and Catherine Tate, who were, of course, two of one of the most popular Doctor companion sets that they had, particularly in the revival era, for it. And I loved him too. David Tennant was my Doctor. And what ends up happening is one of the one that is like the full-on finale of the 60th anniversary special, where David Tennant, as one Doctor, regenerates into a different Doctor, which is now just kind of, that Doctor has now regenerated into someone else connected to that era, but we'll stay away from that for the moment. But in the context of the episode is called The Giggle. And in the context of the episode, what ends up happening is essentially all of humanity kind of goes crazy, where they believe that anything that is their opinion is the only right opinion. And they will just go crazy to try to prove this. And like, it's supposed to be that there's been this thing that's kind of been hardwired into all human brains because of a character called the Toymaker. Within Doctor Who, is actually a villain all the way back from like the original series with the original first Doctor, William Hartnell. And they brought the character back for this 60th anniversary special. And they actually had the character played by Neil Patrick Harris, who did an amazing job as the character. He did a wonderful job as the Toymaker, or as the Toy Master, whatever, Toymaker. And there's also a part of the episode where he literally just like lip syncs to Spice World by the Spice Girls, or Spice Up Your Life by the Spice Girls. And as he's going around and essentially just like turning soldiers into flowers or bouncy balls, or just making them disappear and ending them, and like all this other stuff. He's just like bouncing around doing all this stuff inside of like the headquarters of like this super advanced military unit called UNIT that helps the Doctor. And if anyone knows anything about Doctor Who, this is just like, somehow this fits, but it's also like, I showed this scene to my dad and he's just looking at me like, what the heck is going on here? And I'm like, I don't know how to explain it. But essentially what the Giggle did is it basically kind of flipped everybody's brain to the point where it's just like anything that they thought was the correct thing to do. Like, for example, one of the guys that the Doctor ends up interacting with just out on the street is like, my taxes paid for these roads, therefore this road is mine and I will not move even though there are cars coming at me, and like a bunch of other stuff. And like people are kind of going more crazy, some are looting, some are just being weird, all this other stuff. And that kind of made me, this chapter, you know, seeing Dorian Bragi here, because like, as I stated, like Dorian Bragi idolized Jorl and Jarl, and like they were probably quite devastated, or you know, sad at least, to hear that the you know, other of their idols had passed away, particularly as they find out what happened with that with Big Mom, how they passed away. And then now it's just like, well, Jarl was like the only one who was left at this point in time. From that age, is like the oldest living giant beside, you know, is the oldest living giant period in the world that we are aware of, and is one of the oldest creatures in the world. I mean, like, yes, there's sea kings that are probably older than him, and Zunesha is far older than Jarl, but still, there's, and you know, throwing the Gorosti and Emu into that, depending on how you want to set that up. But there's still, like, so much of that there. And part of, like, the culture on Elbath is not just a warrior culture. It is also this respecting of, like, your elders, the ones that have proved themselves. And that goes with the fact that, like, Jarl was, you know, with King Harald dead, and Hyrule not being a legitimate prince, and then Loki being the one who killed his father, so they have to, you know, he can't be king, given the circumstances, although in human history, when has that stopped someone from being king? Because they killed their father. Because, you know, the whole might makes right and royal blood situation and everything. Jarl was the one who was looked at as, like, the ruler of Elbath, and even the Gods Knights kind of acknowledged that when they were forcing him to make that decision about the children, versus the library and the school. So this flipping of the way that Dorian Bragi look at something is like maybe this small, initially this like small little voice in the back of their head saying something about like Jarl's old, like this, you know, kind of just offhanded comment of like, Jarl's old, but he's still, you know, he's still amazing, but like he's old. And then it just gets flipped because of what Emu did, plus just also amplified to the point where, very similar to what happens with the characters in Doctor Who were being affected by the giggle, because at one point they have one of the characters that we are familiar with in the series. Her name is Kate Stewart, and she's like the head of unit, and she has like a whole Doctor Who history for connections to various characters. But they have it where like they show her being affected by the giggle. And she just goes on like this huge rant at like the people that like work there at unit. For like, you know, I'm the only one who understands how to do this. I'm the only one who knows what's going on here. None of you are worth any of this. And like attacking various people who like are clearly her friends and coworkers and people that she respects and cares about. And she's just like going after them, verbally. And then like as soon as she's like kind of snapped out of the giggle, she instantly is like apologizing and like just so regretful for what she said, because, well, that may have been something a small little voice in the back of her head had said maybe once that she barely heard and didn't agree with. It's like this thing that came rushing forward, and she, you know, she apologizes for it because it's like that's not how it's supposed to be. She doesn't want to think those things. She cares about these people that she works with. I think she also kind of chews out the Doctor when she's in like the giggle affected mode. So we kind of have that there too. And like Dorian Bragi and the other giants are kind of, who are being, you know, demified, possessed, devilified, demi-reversied, whatever, by Emu through Gunko, are kind of having that same thing or a similar thing done to them, where it's just like, any of these like small little negative thoughts maybe about Jarl are just being shoved forward and given prominent thing in their head, and like, we could do a better job than this, we can be better kings than him, why would we care about any of this other stuff, we will do it, or, you know, like, we're the strong rule, where might makes right, you know, all of that type of a thing. So that's kind of where I was, you know, thinking that was going. So as this keeps going, we move on to the next panel, where we have just like the line of the giants that are possessed moving closer and closer this way, as like Kashi. I don't think we see Oimo in this chapter. I thought we saw Oimo with this group, but I don't think we even see him. I don't think we see him either possessed or like helping Kashi. And I think these were the group that were on their way to try to help the kids initially, which is kind of odd because like Oimo's grandson was one of the kids. I don't remember which one he was off the top of my head, but he was one of the kids, so we'll see. But we have like the giants that are possessed slowly advancing further and further on their way to go to try to get Jarl. And the other giant warrior pirates are trying to stop them. And they're like, how can you say that? This isn't you. What the hell happened to you guys? And we have like another giant who we're going to find out his name in a second. His name is Tall Man, and he's kind of like, tall, slender. And he's like, stay back, Kashi. They've flipped. They're not the same people anymore. They've become pitch black demons right down to their core. This guy gets it. This guy's figured it out really quickly. And he's like trying to, get Kashi to move away. And I don't know if he like picks up Kashi and kind of shoves him out of the way, or if it's because he tries to get in front of Kashi to like push Kashi. But as he moves, as this guy who's called Tall Man moves, Dory and Bragi, or the way that the other giants are moving, end up getting it where he is now in their line, where he is now like one of the possessed ones on either side. And then we see him get flipped. And this is kind of showed or represented for how we're seeing this with like the so there's a game that has been brought up a lot in this past week, or the two board games that have been brought up a lot in this past week. One is Othello, and the other one is Reversi, which is the Japanese version of the game, or it's like Japanese is the original one, and then it was kind of like Othello was kind of based on it. And it is essentially like the game board where you have like one team has like black-sided pieces and the other team has like the white-sided pieces. And as you lay out your pieces, your intention is to try to flip your opponent's pieces by lining up your own pieces like around them to make them as part of a line. And then if you can do that, then you can flip your opponent's piece and make it your own piece. And essentially the way that it's designed is that by the end of the game, if the board is filled, whoever has the most pieces of their color wins. So it's kind of like the opposite of chess, where it's like if you get like all of your opponent's pieces and you defeat their king, then you win. Or like checkers, where it's just like you want to try to get rid of as many of your opponent's pieces as possible by the end of the game. For how that works. Although there is Chinese checkers where you're actually not getting rid of any of your opponent's pieces. You want to try to use your opponent's pieces along with your own pieces to try to like get your pieces across the board. But that's a whole other game. And so we kind of see this where it's like it's represented on either side of this tall man being flipped, where we have it that we literally see a game board that is set up with like these pieces for Reversi, where he's represented by a white piece, and then they have two black pieces that are this representation of like maybe Dory and Bragi, maybe Dory or Bragi and like one of the other giants that is possessed line up. He's in the middle. We cut to an actual picture of him, getting trapped in like the circle, and then him getting flipped, and he's going, no, wait, stop, I don't want to be flipped. And it flips, and then we cut to the game board pieces again, where we see now that he's been flipped and is now black, like the rest of them. And we see the piece that I'm assuming is supposed to be the representation of Kashi is just like freaking out at this point in time. So there's lots of like this setup here for the way that this game board is going, which brought me to two other things that I wanted to reference here for this. So the first one is a lot of people, as I said, are comparing this, what Emu's powers are doing here, to Reversi and to Othello, to these board games. And, what we saw in the previous chapter was, Emu and Gunka's body summoning up like the grimoire looking thing, and then using that to summon the knife and the gun, and, stabbing Dory or Bragi, and then trying, and then shooting him, and then like affecting them that way. And then affecting the other giants, and now this is like a continual knock-on effect as other giants Don't know if it has to be specifically giant. It could also be like if one of the, a lot of people are talking about like, well, what if one of the Straw Hats ends up in this situation? If they end up getting thrown in here, like if Usopp goes in here and tries to stop them, is Usopp going to get Domi reversing and evil? Is like one of the questions there. Or like, could this work on Luffy? Is one of the other questions. And like the way that since this is kind of, seems to be based on the board game, would there be a way to, flip them all back essentially by, a lot of people are like, well, if you had like Luffy and you have Bonnie, go into her, like, her joy boy, her freest future that she wants, and have Luffy go into Gear 5th and have them end up like one on one side, one on the other. Maybe not intentional to begin with, but have them one on one side of the Giants and one on the other side of the Giants activate or line up, and then that like just knock-on effect turns all the Giants back to normal, flips them all back, and that would piss Emu off, which would be good in my opinion if you piss off Emu in this setup here, and maybe that would do something. Or they, like, if that's what ends up happening and that works, then that's great. But that's just one of the questions there of like, is Emu's, this part of Emu's ability with this power to like basically make games and bring them to life with devilish consequences. We saw, with Kaido, like a lot of his crew, their names were all based on like card games or suits or something like that for how they were set up. And then, with this one, Emu is, technically, possibly in their mind for a bit of a, symbolic reference is, using the Giants to play a game. Does everybody want to play a game with me type of a situation? Do you want to play a game type of situations here? And again, since we don't know full well of like how Emu's mind works for like who fully Emu is, male, female, are they, there's a theory that like Emu is a child that was either like obsessed with Lily and like had like the childhood crush on Lily somehow and that affected things, or whatever, or that they were someone who had like this crush on Lily when they were a child and then that just grew as they grew up and then that like affected them, obsessed with Lily type of a thing, even once they were grown up type of a thing, and that's why they want Vivi, because Vivi looks exactly like Lily from everything that we've seen. So there's like that concept there. And if it is that like Emu is somehow this like not child mind in an adult body in that way, but like this very childish adult, because we all know how those work, how those can be horrible people to have in charge of any type of a situation of a child with adult powers, or an adult who acts like a child and throws tantrums because they don't get what they want. That if Emu is essentially this like spoiled brat character that like they want to play these games, so there is that thought there that like childish games that are turned into this, with devilish consequences, or just games in general, not necessarily just childish games, but games in general that can be turned into devilish consequences, brought to life with devilish consequences. And an example I wanted to give of that for a character who does something quite similar to it that at least I'm familiar with is in Bleach. We have Shusui Kiraku, who is, well, former commander of the 8th Division and is now the captain commander of all of the Gotei 13, for anyone who follows along with Bleach. And I have been enjoying the 1,000-Year Blood War arc quite a bit. And his, I know what it is, his power setup, is that he is able to basically, the first level of it is bring children's games to life. We see this when he battles against Stark during the Fate Karakura Town arc, where he battles against Coyote Stark, who I loved and I wish had survived. I also love Kiraku because he's great. I also love just a lot of the characters in Bleach. But they have his power, Katen Kikotsu, allows him to bring children's games to life. Tag and kind of a Japanese version of like red light, green light, and various things like that, where he's able to, like, if you lose the game, you get injured. Type of a thing is like how it works for like how it brings it to life. And then the second part, when it goes up to his Bankai level, it ends up shifting where it kind of brings, instead of like a game to life, it brings this play, this very dramatic, dark play to life. Between him and his opponent, where it's just like the way that things are designed in the game, in the play, means that it ends with the opponent's unaliving, however you want to put it, with the opponent's death. And so there's like that type of connection there that I was just like, there is a bit of a connection there with how that could go. With like the way that, that Shunsui power, brings that to life. His Zanpakuto brings that to life in both of those cases as like a child's game with deadly consequences. And this play that is kind of like a version of an adult game has very deadly consequences as well. And like, Imu doing a variation of that would be an interesting way of doing that power in some shape or form. So cutting back to this, we have a nice big double page spread where we see that tall man has now been flipped. And he's like, I feel amazing. So it's just like the power that is coursing through me is essentially what's going on. And we have the other giants. Kashi is still there. I still don't think we see Oimo in this chapter. And I'm looking at the giants that we see that have been demified, and they have not been, none of them look like Oimo. So the other giants, warrior pirates that are not demons now, are running. And they're like, fall back. We're in a bad position here. It seems the enemy took down Gabon too. What? So it's like a bunch of the pirates are filling each other in on what's been going on. A bunch of the giant warrior pirates are filling each other in on what's been going on. And we cut around a little bit. We cut to where we see Ripley, and she is still with part of the division of the giant warrior pirates. And they're like, oh no, that's impossible. And she's like thinking in her head, just like, wait for me, Colin. Yasun was, Mama's coming to save you. So we just have like her going into like, big protective mom mode, trying to get to Colin, get to her son. And she's like, I know Gabon wouldn't have just, given up without a reason type of a thing. Like she'll probably understand the situation if, once it gets explained to her of like, your son's life was on the line and Gabon would not risk that. Scopper wasn't going to risk that. Type of a thing, because of course he loves his son, and she'll probably understand that, but there's still like that whole setup there. And then we see the kids, and they're still walking, and I think they're asleep again. I believe at the last chapter when Imu let loose one of their Conqueror's Hockey Blast, it put like the kids to sleep, but because they're still being affected by Gunko's arrow leading them toward the village, they're still walking. So we have like where it's listed branch 8, which is where a lot of this has been happening. They're, they're devils now. The giant warrior pirates have become complete demons. And we see the kids who are like subconsciously or like hearing this while they're asleep are like imagining like this cartoon version of a devil. A very stereotypical cartoon version of a devil. And I don't know in the anime if they're going to have it be like a really dark red or if it's going to be like a black or something like that, like an inky black devil. I don't know. Either one works. But then we cut to like where the Nightmare Fisher is, and we see, like this little, cartoon devil with a pitchfork and everything crawl out of it, along with several others, as they're like, kind of each one representing, what one of each of the kids thinks it looks like. As they're like, crawling out of the ground. And then we hear, rise up, death means nothing to you. And we see like a character blowing a horn. We'll get to the character in a second. And we see like the the ghost with like the top hat with horns on it, like literally gets up, picks its heads up and like attaches it back to its body and like joins the lineup of like the other nightmare monsters that have kind of now been like supercharged, and we see that like the devil monsters are joining them. I was giving a lot of people were referencing the game Cupheads, which I have not played, but I mean looks very interesting, and considering it's like kind of based on like old school style, Disney and rubber hose animation and stuff like that in a video game, which I love that concept, for like hand drawn setup. I maybe someday I'll play Cupheads. I don't know. That all depends on if I ever end up with any systems that'll play it. But so there's a lot of that. But like I've seen a lot of the animation for Cupheads, and I'm like, yeah, I can definitely see the resemblances there for like how these like nightmare monsters and like the cartoon devil type characters are being animated, are going to be possibly animated when the anime gets to these characters. Still got a little ways to go with that, but still, we get that. And then we cut to see who it was that had the horn. So it's like that's right, wake up, come to life, Elbaf's nightmare will never end. And we cut to the next page, and now we're going to finally get to see the face of Keringham. See what he looks like outside of his, Kieran in a bubble helmet phase. And I guess by some standard, he's kind of handsome, I guess. I don't know. The way that he looks, he's in his hybrid form, which means that like his bottom part looks very much still like a centaur, or he looks like a centaur, and his bottom part still very much looks like his like hooves and stuff like that he has as like his Kieran form. But his face he has like dark hair, possibly black. We'll see what they end up doing it with like the official color. Black, kind of spiky, maybe around his ears-ish for just how it's cut, like a spiked bob. And he appears to have very sharp teeth, like the shark-like teeth. Like if you've seen My Hero Academia, the teeth that Kirishima has, that type of setup is kind of what he looks like. Although Kirishima's hair is actually naturally black and he dyes it red. So maybe that's the reference Oda's going for here. But the thing is Kirishima would never do this. He would be over there just like hardened up fighting all of the demons and everything else like that to try to protect the kids, because that's the way Kirishima works. But we have Keringham saying, and he's like, things are really heating up. No holding back now. That a certain someone's shown up. Rampage to your heart's content, my dream demons. Elbaf, this is your doing. You brought these monsters into this world. And we get like the title card, Oda box. It's, Saint Keringham, mythical dragon fruit model Kieran, hybrid form. So yeah, this is his hybrid form. And we see like some of the other monsters around him, and he's still got like his Triton, and we see that he now has a horn. And this is probably like a horn for like a rallying cry type of a thing for like the monsters. For the, demon dream monsters type of a thing. Now, the way that this is phrased was like a certain someone has shown up type of a thing. In the previous chapter, I believe it is both Keringham and Summers that refers to Imu as kind of a great one, for how like it got translated into English. But the word that they use for it in Japanese, to my understanding, doesn't quite have the best English translation set up, simply because the way that the term is defined in Japanese is that it is someone that you greatly respect but have a huge amount of affection for as well. And the way that we saw Keringham and Summers react last chapter implies that they know very well who Imu is, or at the very least the position that Imu holds, and maybe has even interacted with Imu a few times over the years, through the course of however long their lives may have been. And this confirms again that like Keringham is on the younger side. He's not as old as Summers is, and he might even be younger than Shamrock, but maybe not as young as or maybe even around the same age as Shamrock. We're not sure. or maybe even only a little bit older than like Gunko appears to be, because Gunko appears to be in like her early 20s at the oldest from what we've seen. So there's that there. And so now we cut back to the Straw Hats, and the ones that are still all tied up, and Nami's like, is it me, or are there even more of them now? And Jinbei's like, things have really spiraled out of control. Yes, Jinbei, they have. And Usopp is just like shouting, Master Dory, Master Bragi. And we cut to like a more wide shot where we see like, them still tied up, and we still see Robin like off to the side, like trying to push the thorns off of herself. Usopp seems like he's moved a little bit away from the rest of the group. Maybe he's like scooting on his butt trying to get to where Dory and Bragi is, which would be, something. And we see in the background, like we still see like the flames that haven't been able to be put out yet. And we see like more of the nightmare monsters. Like there's like the cockatrice bird and like another random thing and something that looks like a weird cat that might be a tiger. Like still rampaging in the background. And we hear Usopp shouting, this is your homeland. What the hell are you doing? Open your eyes. How can you bear turning into something with no pride at all? Which is, again, it's like we just see like this, close up as Usopp's face in the panel, as you can tell that he is crying about this, because like he adored Dory and Bragi and everything like that. They're the ones that have inspired him way back at Little Garden to want to become like this warrior of the sea, to overcome his fears, or maybe not fully overcome his fears, but like face his fears in order to prove himself, to better himself, to become stronger and everything, because he wants to protect his friends and he wants to protect the people he cares about and everything else like that. And so Usopp is hitting Usopp very hard, which is understandable. We cut to where we see like the kids are still walking along the branch where there's more of the monsters, and we see some of the other giants have shown up and they're trying to get to where the kids are. And they're like, damn it, we couldn't save the children. No wonder Saul failed to stop them. And so it's like they're like, okay, this explains why Saul had not been able to get them. It's like they just keep walking and we can't stop them. And one of them mentions the kids are guarded by monsters and invisible thorns, and we see a couple of like the giants laying on the ground that I think had tried to protect the kids. Some of the ones that like had met them at the beginning of the previous chapter and tried to like pick up one of the kids, tried to like touch Colin and got stabbed by the thorns, and then subsequently knocked out by Emu's Conqueror's Haki blast through Gunko. So they're like, okay, well, that's what's going on here. That's why Saul couldn't just like pick up the kids and stop them, or like why the teachers couldn't just do that, because like there's some type of weird thing around them that stabs you if you try to touch them. I wonder if there would be a way to like bypass that. As I said, I mentioned in the previous video about like someone who like has no affection for these kids, but then it's just like the mere fact that you're trying to help save the kids implies that you somewhat care for them. Even if it's like on a very base instinct level of like protect child type of a thing, like that would probably still be affected by it. But like with like someone who's smaller, like if one of the Straw Hats tried to like get to the kids and tried to like touch them, assumedly they would still get stabbed. It would just be by much smaller thorns. So, like, we see several of the giants are yelling, and we see that several of the mothers of the children have shown up, and one of them is Bent's mother is yelling, and then another one is yelling for Ylva, which might just be Ylva's mother, so that would be Jarl's great-granddaughter, because I believe Ylva is his great-great-granddaughter, if I remember correctly. So this might be Ylva's mother. And we see, they've shown up, and there's like, if I could pass out now... As if I could pass out now. I swear I'm going to save you. Just wait for me. So I like this reference to the fact that like these guys probably got blasted by like the Conqueror's Haki blast from Emu and Gunko's body from the previous chapter that knocked out several of the warriors and like put the kids back to sleep, essentially knocked them out. And like this mom, Ben's mother, who is possibly maybe the one that's like terrified of his own mother, the scariest thing that he can think of. She is like, it's like fighting against like the urge, this like, oppressive force from Imu to like pass out. She's like fighting against that in order to try to stay awake so she can try to protect her child, to get to where her child is so she can try to save her son. And I like that. And now we get, again, another great big panel, wide panel, where we see like so many of the different monsters. And as I said, stuff is still on fire as they are just rampaging through more of Elbath. And we have Summers and Kieran are talking on like the Denten Mushi, and Summers just is like, "My lord, how far are we to take this?" And Kieran is like, "The board is already covered in our color." Again, this is the referencing to like the game pieces getting flipped as they go. And then we have Emu. I think it's supposed to be Emu, or it's them just still talking. It's like, "These nightmares are made of pure malice. If we let them rage, they'll eventually destroy themselves," is I think what Kieran is saying. And like we're seeing like cut to one of the other villages where we see like one of the monsters is showing up. This might be the Western Village. This might just be one of the other villages. And then we see Emu, and they are like, "Press on until it shatters." And again, we see like a glimpse of one of the demon giants and like the kids, Colin and Ilva, passed out again, asleep as they're walking. And it's like, "Until what shatters?" And then we get like the, close up of Gunko Emu going, "The spirit of Elbath. Had Harald not blundered in that critical hour, this nation would long have been beneath my rightful domain." Dominion, excuse me. And yeah, this is like going back to like okay, was Harald bad? And in the last minute, he had like a second thought, and that, his blunder is that he was taken out by Loki and possibly Jarl, but they want to protect his image to all the other giants, so they claim that it was just Loki that did it instead, type of a thing. Or was it that Jarl had intentionally been trying to undermine the Celestial Dragons, undermine the Gods Knights and Emu by trying to educate the citizens of Elbath with the library and with the school and everything else like that, and trying to intentionally, educate them and bring them away from the warrior culture, so that way, and more toward a peaceful culture, so that way if they're seen as less of a threat, then maybe Emu and the world government would be less interested in Elbath itself, is kind of the question that I have here for that. But yeah, this is going back to like that blunder that he supposedly made. Now we're going to jump back in time a couple of minutes. A few minutes earlier, the Realm of the Dead, and we're cutting to like, this is back about 2 chapters ago, at the end of like 2 chapters ago, 1149, I believe is what it would have been, when Gabon is falling and Scopper is falling after him, because Scopper jumped out of him, and we see that they have left the Sun Realm and are falling very quickly towards the underworld. And we see, Scopper is falling, and we see like the 3 arrows stuck through him from Gunko. And Chopper is like, "I jumped without thinking." And like they are just like both, crash course headed down toward the ground. And Chopper is still at his walk point. He's like, "I jumped without thinking. Why did I do that?" And he's like, "I've got to stay calm. I can do this. I can do this." And he's just like, "I can't let him die." And Chopper, kind of delving into that like cartoon logic of like, if I run faster than when I'm falling, then I'll fall faster. And he like, the whole, spiral legs is like very similar to like when Luffy was fighting against Kaido, where he like legs and then zipped off when he was falling after he'd been burned by Kaido. And Chopper pulls off something here. Now again, is this just cartoon physics that Oda is like applying to this to get at that Chopper can actually try to catch Scopper as he is falling, get ahead of him to catch him? Or is this because Chopper is somewhat in proximity of Luffy now, he is kind of able to tap into this, the Toon Force element from Luffy, and allowing him to be able to just speed up as he's falling by running so he can then get ahead of Chopper and catch him. And it works. He catches him, and he's there falling, and we hear guard point, which is where guard point is when Chopper just basically turns into a giant fluff ball to absorb like impacts. He doesn't use this form too often, simply just because it doesn't have as many of a use for it as like some of his other forms, as like his kung fu point, or as his brain point that he's normally in, or his walk point, even for like its speed boosting setup for like is technically his true form as a reindeer, or his heavy point, or even his monster point. Guard point's one of the ones we just don't see all that often, but it just makes Chopper very fluffy. I kind of wonder if there's ever just days where everybody on the crew are just like, hey Chopper, can you turn into guard point and we can all just use you as like a giant pillow and cuddle? And like Chopper's like, sure, just like puffs himself up, turns into the guard point, and then they all just like sleep on Chopper. Just have a big crew sleepover in the trailer reference there. I'll get to that in a minute for addressing the trailer stuff that we got for what live action Chopper looks like. Yeah, I'll just do that now. So we have that fall, and I'll talk about this before we get to Luffy's group in a second. So yes, I watched the trailer, the announcement thing for what live action Chopper is going to look like for the computer generated Chopper version that they're going to be using. And overall, I think live action Chopper looks pretty good. I mean, like, obviously there's far worse ways that they could have animated the character. And I'm assuming for how they're filming, there's probably someone on set, green screen outfit setups for them. So that way, the rest of the crew, Inaki and the others have someone to, like, for eyeline and to, like, emotional moments react to and react with and everything else like that. The voice sounds really good. The animation looks really good. So far, we'll see how it, looks alongside, the live action actors and stuff like that. I did see one of the comments that was just like, why is live action Chopper so skinny? Has Kureha not been feeding him? And I'm like, to be fair, Chopper isn't always, plump. So maybe they went with something a little more realistic for, like, the dimensions of a deer. But then again, I don't know. Take your pick. And I like that they seem to be basing him not on his, like, original Drum Island design when he first shows up, but more a little bit how he looks a little bit later in the series. So he's more of, like, the cutified version of him for his brain point. And again, we'll see how he looks like for, like, one of the big tests for the character will be once we do get to the Drum Island episodes, which is, I think, going to be either two episodes, I think is the way it's scheduled. For the way that, like, Drum Island is supposed to play out for the season, which makes sense for that one to be one of the 2 episodes, but then, other stuff, I don't know. One of the tests there, obviously, is going to be how well Chopper's animation stacks up to watching him interact with the rest of the cast, and, the cast and everything while they're, for the emotional moments and even the funny moments, but then also how the fight scenes are going to look for him. And hopefully even, like, the fight scenes for, like, Inaki, for his, stretching and everything else like that for Luffy, have, like, improved over the original season, taking what they've learned and then being able to, pun intended, stretch it further to improve upon it. And seeing how they can use that when it comes to to Chopper. I thought I saw something that he's being animated by a similar process to what they used for Rocket Raccoon in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies and in the Marvel movies, which I'm like, yeah, I can see that. That's definitely a really good one to try to base it off of. Just given the circumstances for, like, how well they did with Rocket in the Marvel movies, for how, believable, how well they animated him. So I think that's a good combination there. Back to the chapter. So Chopper Falls uses guard point to soften his and Gibbon's landing. And then we cut to where we have Luffy's group. We're doing a double page spread here. And it's just like, if it's back during the conversation when like Hyrule and Loki are arguing. And it's just like, if you want to hear about it, get on your knees, Hyrule, is what Loki's saying. And Hyrule's like, you killed my father, Loki. And Loki's like, he was my dad too. And it was just like, and look what you did to your own parent. Just like, stop it, Hyrule. And Luffy's like, hey, Chopper just fell down. And the others are like, hey, Chopper just fell down. What? Just like, wait, what? I heard a noise, but did you see him? No. And we cut to, like, Luffy is still eating. He's like, Loki is still eating, too, apparently, because looks like he's chewing as well. And Loki's like, yeah, you're right. Something definitely just fell down here. It's just like, it's just past that ridge. Or, like, maybe it's someone else who said that. It's like, it's just past that ridge. And Luffy's like, wait, how did I know it was Chopper? Someone's with him, but they're hurt. So, and then Sanji. So, what we're seeing in the panel is we see Road, Loki, Luffy front and center, Sanji, Zoro, and then behind them we see Hyrule, and then, not Goldberg, Stanson, off to the side. And Sanji is just like, something serious must be happening if they fell all the way from the realm of the sun. And Zoro's like, let's go find them right away. Which I like because like both Sanji and Zoro really care about Chopper. I love that. So they're kind of dividing up. We have it where Hyrule, Stanson, Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and I think Road maybe. I don't think Road stayed with this group. Are going to go off to go to find where Chopper fell down and Scopper, where they fell down. So that leaves Loki, who's still tied up, laying on the log, so he's not directly on the snow, with Goldberg, who is still cooking, and then Gerd. And they're like, hey, Gerd and Goldberg, is there anything you want us to fetch on the way? Like someone's head or some jewels? I'm like, what? Why would we need to bring someone's head or jewels? Who said this? And it's just like, there's something I want. And it's just like, I think that's Loki that says that. And it's just like, no, Loki, we're not going to set you free. Tisk. And then Loki is just like, no need to be so serious. And then we hear ring, 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 which is, of course, the snail. And it's so earlier on, way back, several chapters ago, shortly after we met Loki, we found out that he has this, like, furry version of a transponder snail. That's like an Arctic, cold weather version of like a transponder snail that he was talking to someone on, and whose name is Mosa. Now, Mosa gets translated to is kind of like shaggy, like, someone has like shaggy hair, or like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo is the way that it kind of gets translated into English. Is kind of what the official did with it. And the snail is now ringing again, and it's like sitting, I don't know if it like crawled, because like they can move, because we see them move, if it like crawled up Loki's shoulder and is now like sitting like right on his chest next to his head so it can answer. And it's like, well, he answers, and it's just like, hello, Loki. Ah! And Loki's like, Mosa, I'm busy, let's chat later. And he's like whisper shouting at the snail. I'm like, dude, you are a giant. Your version of whisper shouting is still going to be very well heard by most of the people who are around you, which we're going to see in a moment. But Mosa talking to the snail, again, we don't know if it's male or female yet. That hasn't been revealed to us yet in this during any of these conversations. And it's just like, I'll be quick. I have my hands full here too. I just have one thing to say. We also don't know if this is an adult or a child or a teenager or whatever. And Loki is like, fine, just keep your voice down. And we see panels of both Gerd and Goldberg are just like clocking what is going on, that Loki is like talking to someone on the snail. It's like, you're not whispering, softly enough, Loki. We're still gonna hear you. It's like, Gerd's like right next to you, dude. Type of a thing. So they're able to listen in on this. And Mosa is like, earlier, I didn't get a chance to tell you before, but the truth is, it looks like I'm not going to be able to use a transponder snail for a while. And Loki's like, what? Did something happen? Again, this is like actual genuine concern, I think, from Loki. And Mosa is continuing. It's like, at first, I was just scared. But before I knew it, I found our conversations to be a calming experience. And I wouldn't trade them for anything. That's why I wanted to thank you again. And Loki is just like, what is this? Is something happening to you? Again, I'm hoping this is supposed to be portrayed as like genuine concern for Mosa. Because assumedly Loki has like talked enough with Mosa, given what we learned earlier on about Mosa, about them being somewhere in maybe like a bad situation, although we don't know the full context of that. There were theories that like maybe it was Gunko that was Mosa that was like trying to catfish Loki, or that maybe there's like a celestial dragon child who is like maybe very upset with being in the, being a celestial dragon child because like maybe they hold views that are different than their parents. That type of a thing. Actually, I just had the odd thought. What if by chance, after watching their brother get beat up several times, if it is Shauria who is, like, after having watched Charlos just get beat up so many times, has somehow managed to, like, maybe gain a bit more of, independent thought or something. And, like, because we know that right now it seems that Marie Joie is being attacked, that could be tied into what's going on here. Where if it is, maybe not Shauria specifically, but like a celestial dragon teenager or something like that, preteen, who has somehow befriended Loki through whatever the heck means you want to go with, has somehow befriended Loki, and now, because Marie Joie is under attack, maybe they can't, use the transponder, or there's like the whole question of like, maybe it's someone who's like, a slave in Marie Joie, or just someone else in another kingdom, or just some other random person that has no connection to the world government whatsoever. Again, we don't know. We haven't been given enough information. We technically know more about Emu than we know about Mosa, to a degree. But then again, reasons. And then we get like this close-up of Loki where we see like his horns very obviously not being in his helmet and everything, and he's still got the bandages all wrapped around his eyes, and he's like, that nasty business didn't crop up again, did it? So again, there's whatever it is that happened to Mosa in the past, possibly traumatizing given the way that they were talking. We'll see how that goes. And Mosa's like, it's okay, don't worry about me. And again, Loki is like, is that place... Again, since we're not getting the proper names, we don't know exactly, like, what place they're referring to. And Mosa's just like, thank you for everything you've done till now. And Loki's like, wait, hey, Mosa! Click. It's just like, snail hung up. Beep. Beep. Durr. And Loki's like, damn it. And, he's yelling over at Gerd because Gerd's, like, watching him. He's just like, what are you looking at? Like teenager that just got hung up on the phone by their crush. What are you looking at? Staring at their like older sister who's like teasing him, which is fair because Gerd is older than him by at least 10 years, 12 years, something like that. By a little bit. Gerd's not as old as Hyrule, but older than Loki, by at least 10 years. And Gerd's just like, it's nice to know that you somehow found a friend to lean on in the realm of the dead. So I like that she's like teasing Loki, which is just funny. And then he's like, don't you dare tell anyone. I'm like, what about Goldberg? He's over there. He can listen in on this conversation. We got the rest of this page, and then we got another double page spread, and then the chapter is done. Sorry, this is longer than I usually do for the chapter reviews, but not finished yet. So now we have Hyrudine's group returning, which has, of course, Hyrudine, and he appears to be carrying Stopper, and then, like, Luffy and Chopper are also in, like, his hands as he's running. And we have Road and Stanson are there following them. Assumedly Zoro and Sanji are here as well. And they're like, Gerd, you have to treat him. It's Yason. He's severely wounded. And she's like, what? And these giants would all know very well who Yason is. I mean, like, they seem to be, like, Ripley seems to be from, like, either the generation just after theirs, like, a little bit shorter after theirs. or, something like that. So, like, they would know who Yasan is. Plus, if he's lived on the island enough, Hybridine would probably have been like, fight me at least a couple of times. To, like, maybe there's been some sparring matches between him and Scopper, which is fun to think about. But they get him, running over, and we see Luffy is, Scopper has had at least some basic first aid by Chopper, who has, like, bandaged him up a bit. And Luffy's like, so this old-timer is popular around here, huh? Good job saving him, Chopper. And Chopper's like, it was nothing special. Praising me doesn't make me happy or anything, you joke. Again, I love that they had that be part of the introduction trailer for Chopper. Also, him hiding very badly. I love that they did that in the trailer. And now we get Luffy's reaction to finding out who Yasan actually is. And he's like, wait, this old man? You're saying he was on the Pirate King's crew? That means he was on the same ship as Roger and Rayleigh. So he's just like, oh my god. He's just like, and one of the other giants, possibly Hybridine, is just like, he served as one of the Pirate King's wings alongside Dark King Rayleigh. He was probably their third strongest member. What? And then we have Zoro, who's just behind Luffy. As Luffy is still eating. Luffy is just eating throughout this whole section of the chapter. I'm like, haven't you eaten enough? Will you stop eating? And Zoro is just like, he really was a big shot pirate, huh? No wonder he was tough. So it's like he's referring back to where they were fighting him up in the castle for the key and everything. Again, Scopper let them have the key, so he didn't mind that they were going to free Loki, and then, like, Luffy could very easily take care of Loki. But everything else happened all at the same time, so it's like, yeah. And Luffy's like, so Shanks knows him too. And Hybridine is like, he just moved. I think he's trying to say something. Yasan, what is it? And Scopper, who has now also been covered up by a blanket, is like, I was second. It's like, you can't let the ego go. And it's just like, he wouldn't let that comment slide about being like the third strongest. I was second. That's funny. I like that. And they're like, Yasan, I'm glad you're awake. What could put a man like him in this condition? Again, 3 arrows through the center of his, chest cavity will definitely do that to someone, regardless of how strong they are. And Chopper's like, all right, that's right. Things up there are bad. Luffy, we need you guys. They've taken the kids hostage. There's only a handful of enemies, but nobody can make them budge. A bunch of enormous monsters are running amok, too. Again, Chopper got shot down and everything before, all the giants started being, demified by Imu-sama, Imu in Gunko's body. And again, now we're cutting to, like, this blast of Conqueror's Haki that is coming from up there, from the Sun Realm. And this is, I'm assuming this is supposed to be the blast of Conqueror's Haki that knocked the kids out at the beginning of the previous chapter. For that. They're like, and on top of all that, Conqueror's Haki blast. Oh! And Scopper, who is still very injured, has the reaction of, hey now, this Haki is... So does this mean that he has felt Emu's Haki before? Thought maybe the Roger Pirates were exposed to Emu's Haki before. That's a possibility. Zoro and Sanji and Giant Warrior Pirates are just all having this reaction of, oh god, that's not good. Of, like, feeling this, like, huge amount of Conqueror's Haki just being blown down at them from the Sun Realm. And the last panels of the chapter are Hybridine, Luffy, and Loki. And we have Hybridine, and he's just like, everybody, we need to get to a lift, need to get a lift up to the Sun Realm right now. Elbaf is in danger. And Luffy's like, Chopper, that's enough. I've got this. So again, they're all getting kicked into high gear. And then we have Loki, who is laughing at this situation. And he's like, what could be the source of this ridiculous burst of Haki? Ha 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 ha, you guys really will need my power now. Don't know if that's going to be true or not, but maybe. Maybe they will need Loki's power. We'll just have to wait and see. But so that's how this chapter ends. I don't know. It doesn't mention anything about being on break next week, but I thought maybe I saw somewhere that there was supposed to be a break this coming week, but I'm not sure yet, so we'll see what happens there. If not, I'll be back next week with the 11:52, and if there is a break, then I'll have one of the other videos up and ready for that, either review or weird devil fruit that I thought of. So, we finally have it that Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji are getting kicked back into the game, Monster Trio getting brought in, but now we're going to get also Hyrule and his giants getting brought in, and Loki. Now, in the last couple of chapters, whenever we've seen Ripley, we have not actually seen Lilith or Bonnie. And I don't think we saw Frankie with... let me go back. Because, yeah, we did see Ripley running around. But we don't see Frankie. And as I said, we don't see Bonnie or Lilith. And now there is the possibility that just means that just like Oda hasn't drawn them and they're just like still there with Ripley. We just didn't see them because Oda didn't like focus on that, which is perfectly reasonable given the circumstances, and we're just to assume that they are still with her. Or because they know that the school is on fire and that the library is on fire, and of course, like, Frankie knows about what happened with Elbath, assumedly, or not with Elbath, and knows about what happened with O'Hara and everything that happened there. He's like, well, first of all, those books and everything that are in there mean so much to Robin. I don't want them to get destroyed. Also, just all of that knowledge in general, I don't want to get destroyed. Plus, a school doesn't need to get destroyed either. And Lilith, of course, would have all of this, all of this knowledge is being threatened and everything. So there's that. Also, there's the possibility that Kuma, along with the Vegapunk clone that they brought from Egghead, might still be at the school, or at the library, or in that area, depending on stuff. And they're like, okay, well, maybe they're going to go and try and work on trying to put out the fires at the school and at the library. And, with like Lilith and Frankie, with like their genius combining, pretty sure they could figure out a way to put out fire, and hopefully save the school and the library to some degree. And, and all of that stuff. And then Bonnie, she would want to try to help because it's just like, she knows, what it's like to be a kid that's threatened. So she would want to help the kids anyway. And then there's that whole, a way that this could end up happening to like domino cascade effect for like turning all of the giants back to normal. If you want to go by the rules of Reversi for how that works, what could happen is, we have Luffy and his group come up from the Sun Realm in the next chapter or two. They're probably going to get back up there in the next chapter, give or take. Will pop up. Luffy will probably end up having to go to Gear 5th form to, try to do any type of damage against Emu or the others, or the God's Knights or whatever. And, Gunko Emu set up in that regard. That happens, pops up on one end of the branch. And then if Bonnie, along with like Frankie and Lilith, if like they're on their way to the school, instead like maybe they went with the group that's maybe going to try to go to the school. Because there was part of the giant group that went towards where the kids were, and then the other one was, I think, going to go and try to do more, work on the school and stuff like that, I think is like what happened. The school and the library. And if Bonnie and Frankie and Lilith went with them, and they're there on that end, and then maybe something shows up that needs to be fought against, Bonnie's like, using her power that she has learned at Egghead with like turning into, not just her Nika-ish type future, but like a future where she is her most free, where we saw her use that against the Gorosei. and everything, where we saw her go into that form and was able to help, fight and everything. If, Luffy's over here on this end of the branch in his Nika form, and if Bonnie goes into her, freest Nika form on this end, her essentially version of the Gear 5th form, on this end of the branch, and all of the giants that have been Domi reversied are in the middle of the branch in some variation, then it's like piece on this end that are the white pieces, and then like all of the ones that are in the middle flip back to normal, back to the way that they're supposed to be. Maybe not all of them, but like part of them do. And it's Emu's like, what the F just happened? And then like, oh frick, I forgot to set up the rest of the game rules. Damn it, I forgot the rules of this game, type of a thing, where it's just like flip, flip, and flip, flip, flip. Type of a setup there might be something that they end up being able to pull off for how that would work. We'll have to see. Again, I don't know the full rules for how that would go. Plus, there's just bringing in like the drums of liberation from Luffy when he goes into that form, and like kind of amplified with Bonnie there, type of a thing. Some variation of that. We'll just have to see. But that's what I have for that. I thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye!